Now I will show you the float property in practice. Take a look at my screen. All I have here is a simple document structure. All I have in my body tag are those two div tags, empty and HTML, one with the class of item1 and the second one with the class of item2. I've created a style tag in my head tag. So now let's start working with it to show you the float property in practice. First of all, let's get our initial reset with the padding of 0 and the margin of 0 like this. And now let's style our divs. The first one with the class of item1. Let's get some width of it, 300 pixels for example, height of 200 pixels, and a background color so we could see it, and let it be royal blue. Now we can see our first div in our browser, so let's copy this whole CSS rule. Paste it underneath. Let's refer now to the class of item2. Let's change the width and the height. Let's switch them. Let's use different background color. For example, this one, dark goldenrod. Let's take a look. And we can see our both divs. They place themselves one below the other as the block elements behave by default. Now let's place the float property to our divs. Float left like this. If we save our file right now, we see the difference, as now our first div is a floating element and goes to the top left edge of its parent. And since our second div now can't see the height of our first div, which is now a floating element, it doesn't see it and also goes to the same corner of the parent. But if we want to place those divs next to each other, all we have to do is to place the float property to our second item as well. Now our both divs are floating and they place themselves next to each other. Now let's go back to our HTML code and let's place our two divs in a parent, for example, in a section. Let's cut it from here, paste it right here. And now you can see that our both divs are in a section. Now let's refer to our section in our CSS code. And let's set its background color. For example, to 555. Let's save our file. And we can see no difference. That's because the parent of the floating elements doesn't see the height of those elements, so it doesn't grow and expand with them, and its height is still 0. We can check it in our DevTools, selecting our section, and you can see in the corner that our section has its height of 0. Now if we comment our float left property for our both items and save the changes, we can see that our divs place themselves one below other and they are placed in a section, which background color you can see on your screen right now. If we open our DevTools, we can also see that now our section has 500 pixels of its height. So this is how it works, and this is how the float property works. But now let's uncomment our floats, because we want our elements to be placed in one line next to each other. But we want to solve this issue of the lacking height of our section, because the background color of the section should be visible right here, because we want now to create another element and we want it to be placed under this whole section. And if we don't deal with this issue of our section being 0 height, our next element won't place itself under our both two div tags, but will try to fit right here and may destroy the whole structure of our website. For example, if we create a third div in our section with some text in it, let's place more text in it. For example, lorem 100. And we want this div with the text to start under our both floating elements. But if we don't deal with this issue with its parent, when we save our file, we can see that our third div places itself right here. And now we can see the background color of our section, which is now visible. Our third div doesn't see the floating elements as well. So it tries to go to the beginning of the section, but is blocked by the floating elements, which it didn't see before. So it stops and places itself where it can find a room for itself. You can see that our third div has the float property set to none by default. So the parent element expands itself with the content of the third div normally. But let's try to do something else. Let's cut this div from here. And let's place it after the section. So after the parent of our floating elements. Like this. Now let's save our file and see the effect. You can see that our third div is in the same place as before, but now it doesn't have the background color of our section, since now it's outside our section, as you can see in our HTML. So how we can solve this problem where we want to place our third div below the whole section right here? The first way is to go to our parent element, which is the section, and set its overflow property with the hidden value. Let's save our file. And now we can see the effect. This is the first way of dealing with the float drawbacks, but it's not perfect, which you will find out soon. But for now, just know that this issue can be solved with the overflow hidden property set to the parent. At this case, the value for this property may also be auto, which will get the same effect, but we usually place it as overflow hidden. Now let's delete our third div from here, like this, and let's set the width of our second item to 700 pixels. The effect is as you can see. This element still behaves like the floating element. It's not that it starts from a new line now. It tries to go next to the first div, but it doesn't fit since it's too wide. So it simply goes under it. We can also use the float right property. For example, for our first item, like this. Now you can see that our floating element goes to the top right corner of its parent. And here you can clearly see that our second element cannot fit into one line with it. But if we decrease its width, for example, to 600 pixels, it will fit into one line. Now you can see that our first div has the float right property, so it goes to the right side of the parent. And our second div has float left property, so it goes to the left corner of the parent. We can change it if we want to float right for 2 our divs, and the effect will be this. The first one goes to the top right corner of its parent, and the second one tries to go to the same corner but meets the first element, so it stops right here. That's how the float property works. Now let's go back to float left once again. for both our elements, like this. Let's set their minimum height for 500 pixels for both our items, like this. And let's set their width for the first one to 70% and for the second one for 30%. And when we save our file, we get the 2 columns layout for our website. Now we have 2 separate columns in our section. In the first one, we could keep main articles on our website. In the second one, for example, a menu or the thumbnails for a photo gallery. And since we set their width using percentages, we can see that our website is responsive no matter how small or big our screen will be. The first column will always take 70% of it and the second one 30%. So that's a nice feature, and for that the float property really can come in handy. Now let's try to set, for example, a border to our first item. For example, 10 pixels, solid red. Let's see the effect. And we can see that it messes up our whole structure. But that's only because the box sizing property. So that's why it's good to place box sizing property with the border box value to every our element, placing it in our initial style reset. Because when we do this, nothing will destroy our structure and our elements will always have 70% and 30%, even if we place a border, for example, to the second one, which can be 20 pixels, solid green. And you can see that everything works perfectly fine. But let's delete those borders for now. And let's create a third div, for example. Item 3. Let's copy this whole CSS rule. Paste it right here. Let's refer to it as item 3. Let's set its background color to dark cyan. Let's decrease the first one of 10% and place 10% of the width to our third item. And now we can get a structure of 3 columns with no problem. And it works the same way no matter how small or big our screen will be. The first column has always 60% of the screen, the second one 30% of the screen, and the third one 10%. So it might be really useful. But now let me show you something else. I deleted everything from my body tag and my style tag. Now I want to show you that in my folder I have an image with a car, which you can see right here. It's a car PNG file. And now I'm going to use it to show you something else with the float property. Let's go to our body tag. Let's create the article tag. And inside it, let's place img tag with the src attribute of the name of our image. And the alternative text, which you should always place in your final project, that's a car that we can see. Below our car, let's place a p tag with some text inside. For example, lorem 200. Let's save our file. And that will be the effect. First of all, let's decrease the size of this image for the better effect. Let's refer to img tag. Let's set its width to 50%, for example, like this. And now we want our text to float around this image, as we can usually see in some articles on some websites. All we need to do is to go to our img and use the float left property, like this. And now you can see that our text floats around our image. We can copy some of the text right here, paste it so we can see it better. We can place some margin to our img tag, for example to 10 pixels, to separate this text from our image. And we have a ready article. We can also use the float right property, like this. Then the effect will be opposite. Our image will go to the right side of the article, and the text will float it around from the other side. We can experiment with our images and our text. For example, we can cut this img from here, place it under our p tag, like this, then create another p tag with some text, save it, and we can see the effect that our image can be in the middle of the text somewhere. It doesn't have to be on the end or on the beginning of it. We can use left property for it as well, like this. So as you can see, you can use this property to many different things on your website, as well as we can work with the text however we want now. For example, use the text align property to justify, so it could look more or less like this. Get rid of those margins. To make a solid text, go to our img, use margin left, for example to 0, to get rid of the space right here, so the image and the text start from the same point. And as you can see, you can work with it, play with it, and change it however you want. This is how the float property works. But now let's focus on some problems related to it and the ways of solving them.